Peace, everybody. What's up? It's Aseer the Jugateers. A lot of stuff going on, of course, from the last time. I got a call. A lot of people been emailing me about the situation in Libya, and why these Africans are in the situation they in. Well, when we look at why the Libyan Africans, or the so-called Africans in Libya, in the situation they in, all you got to do is look at Barack Hussein Obama. He's the reason why Gaddafi was assassinated. But he was the person who actually pulled the trigger, meaning that he was the one who basically was sent to get rid of him. Gaddafi, the thing with Gaddafi was, one, he considered himself an African. Two, he was about to establish a sort of currency, a global African currency that would basically stabilize not only Libya but the African continent, and basically get all the African nations to back their own currency. Well, that was a problem when it came time to now share the wealth between the people that we understand as the International Monetary Fund, the International World Trust. That would be a problem because the African nations have always been slated to be post-colonial nations, meaning that when the colonialism or the colonial system was engaged there and it was broken up, all of the people who were left there to run the government that was so-called black, they all had to be connected to the past colonialist regime. So Gaddafi, just like Robert Mugabe, just like Idi Amin, they all came up under this whole system of the new post-colonial Africa that was going to be about promoting individual African nations above the colonial interests that the Europeans had tried to establish on them. Well, just like Mugabe, and just like Idi Amin, Gaddafi at one time was used by the intelligence agencies of the United States, mainly through CIA under the Nixon administration, as well as the actually going further back to the LBJ administration, all the way into the Nixon, and then from Nixon to the guy that came in after that. I think that was Ford. In any event, their job was to go in, basically rustle up their people, basically freeze the people from moving anywhere, whatever, and then open up the country to international mining consortiums and things like that. Well, Gaddafi, Mugabe, and people like Idi Amin was totally against that after a while, and they flipped the script on their handlers. So it wasn't until, let's say, Barack Hussein Obama came in which they decided that they were going to use him to soften Gaddafi up. So if you remember, as soon as Obama became president, he sent a video message out to the Libyan people, to the people in the Middle East and all of that, and they were talking about, and he was basically telling them that they were going to usher in a new era of peace and political exchange. Well, that was just really the drywall to be able to lull Gaddafi into thinking that he was on some, trying to get together. So in retaliation to that, a couple of African nations set up what was called the African Union. But that African Union, again, was predicated upon people like Israel being a part of it. So they'll let Israel into the African Union, but they'll tell the Haitians that they can't be a part of it because technically they're not African. So that shows you, number one, who is considered African is anybody from the continent of Africa on paper. But if you are not, meaning that if you have a so-called black or a so-called melanated nation here in the Americas, you can't be a part of them. So that shows you and I here in the America that we're not from Africa in mass, maybe by descent but not nativity. So when Gaddafi proposed and brought all the African people, the nations, to Libya to basically work out how the deal was going to go, a couple of them basically went back and told their masters in Europe what was really happening. Because the other thing, most of these so-called African leaders are all Freemasons in Europe. So a lot of their political holdings and stuff like that are not even in the country that they're the so-called leaders of. They export all of their influence and money out of the country and then basically leave the country open up for their resources to be raped by whatever European that got they hand in their back. So long story short, Gaddafi who, once he was about to basically go full circle, he had an agreement with France that basically said that he would stop the tide of immigration, of African immigration into France, so long as France opened up a certain degree of money out of its colonial package that it was still receiving from the African nations that still pay it for colonial occupation. Okay, you can look this up under what is called the Act for the Continuation of Colonialism. And like I said, 64 African nations pay into that. So long story short, they basically set him up, and they wanted to basically get rid of Gaddafi because he was basically extending the jurisdiction and basically trying to buy up a lot of more land in France. He was buying up mad land in France and stuff like that, which would then, the land that they were going to send the refugees to and all that, he was trying to go into France, buy that land up and control it, and basically set up little city-states for the refugees within France. So they was not having that. So they basically went to Obama, got Obama and the special forces to go over there and kill him. And then once Obama agreed to assassinate him, or agreed to his assassination, that then opened up Libya to what was called the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is an old Nazi, Islamic Nazi faction that was started by who they would call the Mufti of Berlin, who himself was a Khazarian Jew, who himself was basically one of the proponents of the original Nazi or final solution, which led to the gassing of all of them people and the killing of the original Germanian people. You can get a book called Black Victims of Hitler, and it'll get into that aspect of it, the colonialization and the sterilization that they was doing. On top of all of that now, being that Gaddafi was assassinated by your first so-called black president, right, who we all want to believe, they made us believe that his father was from Africa, this dude named Barack Hussein Obama, when that's not true. His father, in my research, was a dude named Frank Marshall Davis. And the reason why I know that, or the reason why I feel that this guy that they were trying to pass off in Africa wasn't his father, was because he only met his mother, aka Stanley. I don't know how you're gonna name a woman Stanley, but whatever. Name mother Stanley, only met her once. Then when you look at the picture of him in the airport, I've analyzed this picture. There's a picture of him in the airport, and he's standing there as a little boy in front of his grandfather and his grandmother and his mother. When you look at the person's hands on his shoulders, the hands are black, but the picture of the person white. So that means that the picture was doctored. That means then that what we understand this dude to be, I don't know what 5-year-old, 10-year-old boy, they got another picture of him in Hawaii, and he's on the shoulders of this dude that they say is his uncle, but when you do the research on it, the dude is a damn astronaut. So again, man, I don't know how many little Asiatic black males got Caucasian male uncle astronauts as family members, but whatever. You know what I mean? Y'all believe that, y'all believe whatever. So I say all of that to say this, that he was a program shill from the door, because the guy that they say that was his father, Barack Obama, was actually down with the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. That was set up by, again, CIA, MI6, right? Any African leader that was there for the African people to lead them into a better future was assassinated and killed. So that means everybody that's running these African nations now, most of them dudes is all European. They all basically not only white in the mind. Let's go to Mugabe. People can say what they want about Mugabe. I was not Zimbabwean. I didn't grow up under him. But I read a lot of the legislation stuff that he did. And you can say one thing about him is that he made it so that way all the Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe, y'all one of the only African nations that own your land. Period. So you can hate him. You can say he did this, he did that. It don't matter. He made it so that way you own all your land. Right? To the point where he kicked the crackers out. You understand what precedent that is? He kicked them white Zimbabweans out. Now the first day, the new dude who is the bagman for China and for MI6, this new dude that's taken over, one of the first edicts he put out was how he gonna pay back the white people whose land was taken by Mugabe. So that should show you right. Then right after that, the Prime Minister of England said that she wants to go down, or he wants to go down and actually show support for the new government by going there and asking them and making sure that they have what they need as they go into this new era of Zimbabwe. which basically means that all of the stuff that was set up for y'all to have your own stuff, that's dead. The new interim government that's coming in there right now, all of them people is under the shield. All of them people is under the foot of Europe. Before he went and took over Zimbabwe, he went and took a trip to China first, which means that he had to go ask the Chinese if it was okay for the coup d'etat, and then they went in there. Chinese people said, cool, let's go in there and do that. One thing about Zimbabwe too is that they don't have their own currency. So Zimbabwe is used as an international clearinghouse or laundry place for international currency of all denominations. So you can go there. There is no Zimbabwean money because the Zimbabwean money is so hyperinflated that they use the Chinese yuan as the dominant currency in there. But you can go there, whatever type of currency you want, and do exchange. So basically they turn the country into a giant foreign exchange pit, right? So in the interim of that, they're going to open it up so the Europeans get back up in there. So I would say within the next 10 to 15 years, if barring the Zimbabweans really understanding what Mugabe left them, they're going to find themselves in the same place that Sudan is in right now. When they went in and broke the Sudan up into North and South Sudan, they're going to be in the same place that, they're going through right now in Cameroon. The same thing is happening. You got the English-speaking fighting the non-English-speaking. Just like in Rwanda, you had the Tutsis and the Hutus when they was going at each other. And all of it is based upon European encroachment and expansion into the continent. Because what is happening, brothers and sisters, is that they're gearing up for this war between the United States. Actually, on one side is going to be the United States, Britain, France, right? Germany. On the other side is going to be everybody else. China, Russia, Iran, what's left of Syria, and everything else. It's already a known fact that the ISIS thing that exists now, what they call the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, that is all funded by United States, is MI5 and MI6. That's a known fact. It's a known fact. That all, what we know understand as ISIS and all that, that all came out of Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda thing came out of the Taliban. The Taliban thing came out of the Muslim, or what, again, I refer to as the Muslim Brotherhood. This is why now, with all of the slavery now, open slavery happening in Libya right now, it's really funny. Let's look at who they're enslaving. They're enslaving people from Chad, people from Nigeria, people from Ghana, people from Liberia, people from Egypt. So why, if that's the case, and Libya is part of the African Union and all these nations are together, how come there hasn't been a coalition of African nations to go into Libya the same way the United States went into Iraq, the same way the United States went into Iran in the 50s, the same way the United States went into Vietnam, right? How come there's not African nations now? They got their own country, their own armies, where each one of these nations, their individual nationals, are being enslaved by a crooked regime that was set up by European powers after the deposition and the assassination of their rightfully elected leader, Muammar Gaddafi, blessed the day. Excuse me, rest in peace. So again, I'm not getting into their individual politics because I didn't grow up in Libya. So I don't know about all the secret police and all that other shit. All I know is when it came to getting money and supporting African nations, and at the time that Gaddafi was running Libya, education free, healthcare free, transportation free, schooling free, homelessness nil. There was no homeless people, none of that. Now that he's gone, slavery, mass unemployment, hyperinflation, what do you call it? International drug trafficking, all of this. Because what you need to understand is the Western so-called white supremacy powers, WIGHT, meaning creatures, phantoms, the dregs of society that basically at the top, the Rothschilds, the Soros, the Bill Gates, the all of these type of people. What you have to understand is they are the worst of humanity. You understand? They are the exact worst of humanity. But the worst of humanity in this crooked world is at the top, because the worst of humanity has made the best of humanity. You and I, our people, dark people, melanated, Asiatic, individual inhabitants of any free national nation in the world, they have made them feel that they are the worst. So what you have to understand is white supremacy is at its best when you are at your worst. Caucasian people do not feel that they are safe when you are free. You understand? So when I say white or black now, it's not even a color thing. It's a mental idiom that has now infested humanity to the point that it will not be able to see another 45 or 50 years in the state that is going. Because the people that are at the helm of this thing have taken everything that we used to hold sacred now for granted. Look at it. You can't even be a part of a political movement against things, because most of these political movements, Black Lives Matter, that's a homosexual, so-called white LGBTF movement on the low. That's why most of the people in Black Lives Matter t-shirts is Caucasian people. Let's keep it real. The Mormons believe that the reason why black people exist is because they were the ones who were originally white first, but because they disobeyed God in the war of heaven, they got cursed to become black and then fell to earth, and now white people are supposed to be there to control them. So I'm saying that I'm using those as examples of cultural idioms that show the ingrained idea that you cannot exist in your free national state, that you cannot exist, that in 2017 now, we're still understanding, we haven't gotten over the so-called transatlantic slave trade, if that happened the way that we've been modeled that it happened. And now we're in 2017, we're dealing with mass slavery in Libya. But it ain't just Libya. It's West Papua New Guinea they doing this to black people. It's the Dravidian people in so-called India. It's the Tamils they doing this to. It's some of the Moros they doing this to. It's the Jawara people. It's the so-called black Negro colored here in America. Everybody that's Asiatic, that are actually the original proprietors of the land, the autochthon individuals, us, right? The Moors, what I refer to as the Moors, we are the ones that are under the most attack, because we are preyed upon by every other race in this society, including our own. So, until the Africans can handle their own problem, meaning one, form a coalition of African nations and go in there in Libya and stop waiting for white people in the UN to do something that you could do for yourself. Because the people that's enslaving them Africans are backed by the French government, are backed by elements of the Belgian government, are backed by elements of the United States government. And all of these governments are Nazi influenced. They just took a whole nother tract of land from the Palestinians in Israel and massacred at least 30 or 40 children in the process. But they swept that under the rug. Nobody want to talk about that. The Israelis just put out another edict that said Africans that were migrant workers that came there, they now have to go. And if they don't go, they're going to force them into jail. So if you want to be a melanated person and stay in Israel and you're not so-called Israeli like that, they're going to lock you up. They're going to take your business and lock you up. And we're supposed to believe, but guess what? The same thing is happening in elements of Saudi Arabia. They're doing that to the Ethiopians. They killing them and brutalizing them there. So the question is, when are the Asiatic people of the world going to stand up and get the boot off their neck and work together to break this thing down? The reason why most of them not is because a lot of these Asiatic and African kingdoms that are in the position that they in now have stolen the land from the indigenous peoples and the Moors that existed there too. So y'all complicit in the same boat. Like I said, why you think, matter of fact, don't take my word for it. Look up, I forget the name of the new president in Zimbabwe. Look up his son. Type in his son's name and look at how his son, look on his son's Instagram page and all that. Look how he popping. Look at what they doing. This is why most of 99% of most of the African leaders in Africa, especially right after colonialism, they all had Caucasian wives. All of them. All of them, including Nkrumah and Nkrumah. The only one that didn't was Patrice Lumumba, and look what they did to him. So again, man, know your history, B. Stop bigging up people like this piece of shit Obama and the rest of these people act like this nigga did something for you when he didn't do nothing for you but destabilize your whole continent. He helped destabilize your whole continent, and over here, he set up laws to protect police from shooting and summary killing so-called Asiatics undeclared on the land. Why? Because the one thing he did tell you when he was there, I believe it was on the Tom Joyner show, when they said, well, here it is, my first black president. That nigga went on, and the first thing out of his mouth, he said, well, please don't call me that, because black has no standing in law. This is the sitting president, so-called Negro black president, sitting there telling you that what you identify as has no standing in law. And you wonder why this nigga ain't never do nothing for you in the 8 years he was president? And y'all niggas is pining for him, acting like this nigga Trump is the worst thing in the world. Trump ain't the worst thing in the world. Anybody that grew up in New York in the 80s grew up under the Trump regime. So we already knew what was the deal with this nigga. From day one, we knew. So everybody now that's looking at him and trying to act like everything is this or that, really in the end, this nigga's all about money. I told y'all from the beginning, mad tapes ago, this nigga was a shill for Putin because they got him in the honeypot. Also, what's happening now, these things that's happening with them now, there's some good news happening. There's a blowback situation where a lot of the international pedophilia, human trafficking ring of children and the ritual sacrificing of children has now reached a fever pitch where they now doing mass arrests, not just in this country, but all over the world. They're getting rounded up. The problem is it ain't happening soon enough for people like me. And the government is still sweeping it under the rug. But at the same time, all of this is happening to further desensitize you and to get you to realize that they don't want you to go into your proper self and your proper estate because you still have one. You are still a remnant and protected beneficiary of the old Moroccan Empire, in regards to what they want to say, because that was the empire that ushered in Western civilization. Remember, it's the Moors that told the Europeans that the world was flat. So it's real funny right now that there's this whole movement now of trying to get people to think that the world was flat again. Now, when we told the Europeans that, that was basically the G to keep them locked up in Europe. So now you got a whole group of Asiatics as well as Europeans trying to follow that same mantra. So what I'm seeing is that the cylindrical aspect of time is now catching up with itself, where everything that we was dealing with at the fall of the empire, we dealing with right now. And guess what? That means that those of us that was at the fall of the empire, now that we back on the rise, we are going to be the ultimate beneficiaries of it. Why? Because we're not involved in the Negro, black, colored, African American nonsense. We're not nobody's slave. We know who and whence we came. We know the true history of who we are. We've accepted the fact of what we are, and we have declared and proclaimed that to the national body politic and corporate that we understand as Western civilization. So when we speak of the United States, remember, you as a Moor are supposed to know what that really means. It don't mean these United States, the 51 states outside of the United States, Puerto Rico and Guam. No. The United States is actually the empire of cities. And the empire of cities are the 3 stars that are on the flag of the District of Columbia. 1 is London City, 2 is Vatican City, 3 is Washington, D.C. Vatican City is the spiritual head, London is the financial head, District of Columbia is the military. And then in between all of that, the last unseen star is Tel Aviv in Israel. You understand? That's the summation of white supremacy now on the planet. So y'all know who the enemy is. Y'all know what's going down. What if any, are people going to do about it? You going to protest? Big up to all of the Africans that swarmed the Libyan embassy in France. That need to be happening anywhere that there's a Libyan embassy. Y'all need to be bombing it. So-called Moors here in America, start writing letters. Start a letter writing campaign. You got a temple. You want to be involved in international work in the uplifting of fallen humanity. Use your pen, which is mightier than the sword. You Grand Sheiks, you got Moors in your constituency. Start a letter writing campaign to the head of the Libyan government, demanding that they free all of the Africans and all of that. Start sanctions. Start looking at Libyan products on TV. Any Libyan product that is out there they are selling to you in your community, boycott it. Boycott. Don't even just do it to Libya. Do it to any of these United States corporations that exist, and tell them that you aren't gonna divest and not purchase any of their products unless they stop the mass slavery, not only in Libya but in West Papua New Guinea, in India, of the Jawara and the Tamil people, of the Yazidi people who worship Malak Tars, who we today call the Kurdish people, the so-called Moro people in the Philippines, the Asiatics here in North Central and South America, anywhere where there's Asiatics under the boot of white supremacy, colonialism, we need to do something about it. And it got to start with the original people. So again, first in time, first in line. Let's stand up and be the proactive Moors that we know that we can be, because the only person that's going to free us and get us out of this situation is ourselves.